Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war, but I am going to do a larger kind of geopolitical analysis of what's going on in the world. News update. I am sorry that I am producing so much content at the moment. It is just insane. But I guess that's because I feel like I'm just, at the moment, just being a rolling news channel. And I'm so interested in everything, and everything's happening all at once, obviously, as it does every day all around the world. And you can connect everything to everything else. There is this idea that the world is just this interconnected spider web of news and activities and actions and rhetoric and events. So here we are, lots to talk about. I'm going to start by not talking about Ukraine particularly. There's just a bit of breaking news that is coming out from the United States that I think, given everything that's happening in the United States politically and the febrile atmosphere that there is there, it is worth, I think, discussing this. So the breaking news is that 3 people have been shot, I believe, according to reports, 3 ICE detainees were shot, with 2 confirmed dead and 1 injured at a Dallas, Texas ICE facility. This is Donald Trump's America, says Ed Crescenstone. The shooter, identified as a white male, was found dead on the roof of a nearby building with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. No ICE officers were reported injured. The exact identities of the victims have not been publicly disclosed, and details remain limited as the investigation is ongoing. Now, assuming that is all correct, and you know, I can't verify those claims, but assuming that detainees have been targeted and these weren't ICE employees that were targeted by this gunman, then what the response was by the people right at the top of the American administration is absolutely disgusting. And this is exactly what has happened every time there's been a shooting recently. So when there was an attempt on Trump, when there was a shooting of Melissa Hortman in Minnesota, when there was a shooting of Charlie Kirk, like straight away, people went absolutely for the jugular. And I just think it's unwise. And I'm trying to praise it, trying to couch this in terms of, like, we don't really know yet. But here we have JD Vance saying the obsessive attack on law enforcement, particularly ICE, must stop. I'm praying for everyone hurt in this attack and their families, assuming that the people shot were ICE employees. And then it's not only JD Vance, though. It was also Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who said there was a shooting this morning at the Dallas ICE detention facility. Details are still emerging, but we can confirm there were multiple injuries and fatalities. And I can't, that's an image. I don't think I can click on that, because she actually said similarly. And it was, I think, deeply irresponsible of what she said as well. In fact, if we put in Noem, we should be able to find what she says. Kristi Noem, Secretary Kristi Noem here. I presume she hasn't deleted it. The obsessive attack, no, yeah. So it looks like she has edited it, because when it's grey like that, it means there's a new version of the post. Right, she has changed it. That's really interesting. There was a shooting this morning at Dallas field office. Details are still emerging, but we confirm there were multiple injuries. The shooter's deceased by self-inflicted gunshot wounds. While we don't know the motive yet, we know that law enforcement is facing unprecedented violence against them. It must stop. So anyway, like the idea that this is, you know, she says there must be violence. The violence against ICE personnel must stop. It appears that this was an attack on the detainees, which then makes you think, well, this is an attack on illegal immigrants, or people that are probably illegal immigrants, and therefore is possibly a racially motivated or politically motivated attack. And, you know, here's another example. Jack Posobiec, who is been involved with the administration a little bit, said leftists attacked a Fort Worth ICE facility, a trans radical murdered Catholic children, a leftist murdered Charlie Kirk, a leftist shot up the ABC station. Now there is a sniper attack on ICE in Dallas, all in the last few weeks. And of course, that is a pretty bad misinterpretation of what's happened. So I think this is dangerous rhetoric from people that don't wait. I don't know what happened here. I have no idea who committed this, but just, everyone calm the heck down and just stop being so politically opportunistic, I would say. Wait until decent data comes out. Right, I am going to get on to Ukraine now. So we are going to start with Zelensky speaking at the UN. So I think I presume he's just finished speaking at the UN. I don't have too much information about what he has said. I'll actually go to this first. He started by saying, what can Sudan, Somalia, or Palestine, or any other people living through war really expect from the UN? For decades, just statements. Syria deserves the strongest support from the international community. They have been a bit left out of it. Well, Bashar al-Assad was deposed, and then it was not until relatively recently that the US decided to take sanctions off a country that was absolutely screwed over. And you think, I don't know. I just feel sorry for Syria to some degree. 19 simple Russian drones violated Polish airspace. Only 4 were shot down. Luckily, they were not Shaheeds. Otherwise, the results would have been horrific. What else has he said? We're going to talk about that one in a second. We have decided to open up arms exports. There are powerful systems tested in the real world when every international institution failed. You don't need to start from scratch. We're ready to share what has already proven itself in real defense. And interestingly, he said, war has already reached too many people to pretend it has nothing to do with you. Tens of thousands of people now know how to professionally kill using drones. Stopping that kind of attack is harder than stopping any gun, knife, or bomb. Even simple drones can fly thousands of kilometers. Even countries with limited resources can build new weapons dangerous to their neighbors. Soon drones will be fighting drones, targeting critical infrastructure, targeting people, fully autonomous, no human involved. That's really scary stuff, right? This is a dystopian view of the future, but it's pretty damned accurate. I wrote an article recently with Brendan Kelly on drones being the new tool of murder and seeing them used by cartels in Mexico and in Israel, actually, used by gangs, by criminals, basically, to kill people. And now we're entering a period of where AI is going to be utilized in terms of drones. And yeah, they are going to be relatively cheap but easy way of causing absolute freaking mayhem. And it doesn't have to be state actors, on their neighbors. But, this was a difference between, was it third generation and fourth generation warfare? Is it fourth generation warfare? We're now in fifth generation hybrid warfare, informational warfare. But fourth generation warfare, I think, was the understanding that it would move from state actors to non-state actors. So you started having more, in previous eras, you would have like World War II. It was wars between states, right? But then you started getting ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., and you weren't quite sure who you were fighting against or where they were, and it kind of moved across borders. That was fourth generation warfare. And it's that kind of a warfare that could easily utilize drones. Like terrorism, drones are going to be a tool for terrorists, for state actors, for anyone that wants to have cheap and horrific technology at their hands. It's just fascinating that Zelensky is talking about that openly at the UN in a really kind of dystopian way. But it's true. We need to think about this. This is one thing he did say, which was fascinating. It's sort of a barbed attack at Russia and China and North Korea, and to a degree Russia as well. But I'm trying to work out whether the last bit is actually a threat as well. So this is what Zelensky says.
Ukraine doesn't have the big fat missiles dictators love to show off in parades, but we do have drones that can fly up to 2,000-3,000 kilometers. We had no choice but to build them.
So we don't have these big fat missiles that you see on parades, your big fat missiles in Pyongyang or Beijing or Moscow, but we do have drones that can fly 2,000, 3,000 kilometers. And by the way, all of you guys are in range type thing. I don't know. I don't think it is a threat, but it is, a bit of a barbed attack on Xi Jinping, I think, and others. Okay, so Right. Zelensky met with an awful lot of people. In fact, if we go here first, and I haven't heard the result of all of these meetings, but Zelensky in New York was supposed to be meeting, obviously speaking to the General Assembly as he's just done, and I presume some of these meetings are still to take place. Joins the coalition on returning Ukrainian children, holds bilateral meetings with Trump, the UNGA president, General Assembly president Annalena Baerbock, who used to be the German foreign minister, leaders of Switzerland, Mozambique, Brazil, Liechtenstein, I think it's Prince of Liechtenstein he's meeting, and Spain. So, he has to choose his meetings carefully and use his time as effectively and as efficiently as possible. So I would love to know what the rationale is for meeting with the leaders of Mozambique and Liechtenstein. Brazil, for sure. Spain, important. Switzerland, interesting. Yeah, no doubt important. Liechtenstein and Mozambique, what's going on there? So anyway, I find that, it rather piques my interest. Now, Zelensky said he met with President of Kazakhstan, the President Tokayev. Kazakhstan is one of these very important countries that exists in the peripheries of Russia. It actually bridges sort of Russia and Asia, Russia and China to some degree. And I guess China and Russia will be fighting over not control, but over influence over Kazakhstan. It is, I think, natural resource rich in terms of oil, as far as I remember. And I also reported this morning that there are 7,000 trucks stacked on the Kazakhstan border waiting to go into Russia. And we don't quite know why that is, what they're doing. Are they just checking them for, are the Russians checking them for Operation Spiderweb type weapons inside? Or is it that the Kazakhstanis are holding them back? I don't know. But the key task now is achieving a just and lasting peace, says Zelensky, with reliable security guarantees. We discussed in detail the efforts of Ukraine, the US, Europe, and other partners around the world to bring this war to an end and stop the killings. We also addressed trade and economic cooperation, as well as the interests of Kazakh companies in participating in Ukraine's recovery. So this is one of these leaders that I think is super important to get on side. It really, really is. And in fact, this is one of the leaders that's very important to Europe and to the US in terms of you want to court Kazakhstan rather than it's a zero-sum game. You either have them under your sphere of influence or, Russia or China. It's almost like playing a board game at Twilight, whatever, Cold War board games of like, what country can you get under your influence? And you're vying for each of these countries, which is very much like what the Cold War was. Now, we had two things going on yesterday that I've widely reported on, so I'm not really going to go over it again. But we had Trump's speech that I will not go over his speech, but I will go over some reactions to his speech because it was batshit crazy in the UN to the other countries' assembled leaders. And then you had the bilateral meeting between Zelensky and Trump, and then Trump and Macron. And it was incredible to hear Trump's change of positioning, as according to his statement last night. We haven't heard too much from Trump on top of that as today has progressed, but it was a staggering change of positioning from a US point of view. Absolutely staggering. Anyway, I've already been through that. What is new in Trump's statement, says Christopher Miller, quoting from a Ukrainian MP. So this is Yaroslav Zhelezniak, a Ukrainian MP, looking at Trump's complete change of position to supposedly be in a position that advocates for Ukraine winning a military war against Russia and taking all their territory back. What is new in Trump's statements made today, or what do they mean for us? He says absolutely nothing. And what should we expect next? Also nothing. So there are many people that are saying this is just Trump's rhetoric, or, we even given what he said, we should expect nothing. They're going to sell weapons to NATO, the Americans, but they're not really, some are arguing this is an off-ramp for continuing to assist Ukraine. That the US said, right, go for it, European Union. go for it, NATO. We'll sell you stuff. You need to go and help these guys. They can win back their territory, but we're really not going to be involved as mediators, as negotiators, so on and so forth. And actually, many people appear to be aligning with that kind of view. Here we've got Nick Patton-Walsh from CNN saying Zelensky is no longer being asked to make unpalatable concessions of land that Ukraine has lost thousands in the defense of. Instead, he's now being goaded into the impossible retaking of land Ukraine could not get back in summer 2023 counteroffensives. So what the Nick Patton-Walsh here is saying is that Trump is almost goading Ukraine on to retake all their land back to their original form and then maybe even go further. So he seems to be indicating, Trump, that Ukraine could even continue to take land off Russia. Anyway, it is important that now the US is not demanding territorial concessions from Ukraine. And that is a massive change. That honestly is a huge change. But is it a case of goading them on to actually just get a bit of wind behind their sails because of, get a bit of energy and a bit of morale boost from what Trump says, and then actually, the war is not one that can be won militarily with any great ease. I mean, my position has always been it's a war that Ukraine wins by doing by doing two things. One, bringing about the economic collapse of Russia, and two, hitting from a distance. I've just done a whole video on the FP5 Flamingo drone, which I'm going to release probably in the middle of the night. Just schedule that to come out in the middle of the UK night, just because I had so much data to talk about concerning the Flamingo that's just coming out at the moment. And I've got a military aid video lined up, ready to record, but I'm producing way too much content at the moment, and I'll just exhaust myself today. But anyway, it's just one of those crazy, crazy days. But Ukraine can win militarily, but it will require the complete collapse of the Russian, or largely the collapse of the Russian economy, and then using distance munitions by their bucket load and throwing them into Russia and occupied territories. Now, we are seeing both of those things happening at the moment. So that is good news. CNN, as I've just said, I've just said that. Both paths, so slight rewording of that. Zelensky is no longer pressured to concede territory, but now faces a different impossible task, reclaiming land Ukraine couldn't take during the counteroffensive. Both paths are difficult and risk weakening his position. So Zelensky's position and Ukraine's future. So, you don't want to see Ukraine get too excited, and of course they won't, too excited by this and start doing, really brash military moves. I don't think they would do that, because they can't do that, because I don't think they've got the resources to do that. I hope everyone is all okay in the live chat. Welcome. Right, the fighter bomber channel. So this is actually quite an accurate aviation telegram channel, either run by a present pilot in the VKS or a former pilot. As Status 6 says, Fighter Bomber Channel is affiliated with the Russian Air Force. So, responding to Trump's words, or Trump's Truth Social post there, Trump got swayed to the dark side once again, but surprisingly, hardly anyone cared, because such swings are normal for Trump. That's one. And Trump's words and actions don't really match. That's two. In other words, he can say what he likes, but until we see an alignment of actions with words, and this is what many of you have said, yeah, brilliant, like hearing that, but it means nothing until there is action that matches that. My position is slightly different, because I don't think you're going to see action. In fact, what Trump's rhetoric indicates is not action, but I think it's a not action that's really important. Like, he's not going to get in the way of Ukraine doing the sorts of things they want to do. Whereas previously we've been worried about, stopping weapons going, or stopping intelligence sharing, or doing this, Pete Hegseth being a bit of a plonker, and actually putting obstacles up. Whereas this looks like Trump is just going to go, I'm not going to have anything to do with it. You go and do what you want. And actually that might be a beneficial position for Ukraine. Some people, like the Telegraph, are saying that that's bad. That is the US walking away. Others are like, they're walking away, but they're still selling stuff. They're still intelligence sharing. It's just Trump is not going to get annoyingly involved counterproductively. So you can read this in lots of different ways. So I'm not sure that you need actions to match words as much as people think. What this does mean is that the EU and NATO outside of the US are largely on their own, that the US isn't going to contribute any kind of aid packages or anything. But we weren't expecting that under Trump anymore. Like, we've given up on that. So, you know, I think some people are just misreading this slightly. Anyway, fighter bomber, the Russian, I think, slightly misreads it there. On the other hand, almost all hints of discussions about peace talks among all the more or less important players have disappeared. That's an important point. It looks like peace negotiations are now a distant memory, which means we are slowly entering the winter campaign. And that means it's time to slightly cut off the Ukrainians from gas, electricity, water and heat, and sewage too. Why not? Yeah, why not? So that's fighter bombers' position, which is let's just completely screw over Ukrainian civilian life. Okay, just a very quick synopsis of Trump's UN speech yesterday, which, as I said earlier, batshit crazy. It was nuts. He got up and he started with, broadly speaking, that my polls are amazing. He tried to like weave that into his narrative. I think maybe, I don't know if the whole thing was stream of consciousness because his teleprompter broke. And there are theories, because the Times reported some time ago that there was a rumor that someone had actually said, if he comes to the UN, we're going to turn the elevator off when he starts walking up, or something like this. Like, so it might well have actually been done on purpose. I know a lot of the right wing is shouting about the UN doing this on purpose, but it actually might have been, because there's talk about literally the elevator being turned off before it actually happened. Anyway, teleprompter didn't work, and then he just went nuts at, say, the UK, at green energy, the mayor of London, immigration, and then all the usual stuff, and saying how one of his polls are. Imagine if, I don't know, Emmanuel Macron got up and in front of the whole UN just waxed lyrical about how amazing it was and how his polls are really good. Everyone would be like, why are you telling us this? This is a UN. It's not a political rally. But Trump treats everything like a political rally, and we kind of normalized it. We shouldn't normalize it. It is bonkers. And Ishan Taror here says, a senior foreign diplomat posted at the UN texted me this, quote, the man, this is Trump, this man is stark raving mad. Do Americans not see how embarrassing this is? I was listening to an analysis on the Bulwark last night, Sarah Longwell and Andrew Egger, I think it was, talking about this speech, right? And she hadn't listened to all of it. She'd heard some clips, but he had listened to it all. But she was like, I think we've normalized how crazy he is, because in Trump 1.0, when he did say things like that, we got really, really embarrassed. And it was really embarrassing that he was doing this on an international stage. But in Trump 2.0, there's been another 8 years, or however many years, there's been another 4 years in the intervening period of getting used to Trump's bonkers personality. And then another 7 months of this all craziness being normalized. So he gets up in front of the UN and he says absolutely bonkers things. And everyone's like, ugh, that's Trump, innit? Yeah, there you go. And we kind of normalized embarrassing, insane behavior. And I think that is a dangerous place to be, because you can then smuggle in all sorts of other stuff. Now, the BBC did a pretty good job. They had a 7.5-minute segment where they fact-checked stuff he said. And it was all complete nuts. I mean, so I've been a bit critical of the BBC recently because they have just platformed Nigel Farage and Reform hugely. They gave 56 minutes to while the Lib Dems are having a conference, to Nigel Farage talking at a press conference the other day. An hour. They dedicated an hour to Reform. And then they don't understand why people are criticising them for platforming one political party over another. That political party represents, was it 0.6% of the MPs, and they get 25% of news coverage on the BBC News. It's just absolutely incredible. Anyway, that said, the BBC did a really good job here of, as Brian Allen said, the BBC just dropped the diplomatic equivalent of a slap in the face, dissecting Trump's entire unhinged rant line by line. So it did a pretty good job of
and said green
of fact checking it. So good stuff there. Now, just finally, let's listen to someone else give a bit of an analysis of this speech, because I think we do have to realize that one of the most important politicians in the world is nuts.
I think it's impossible to listen to Donald Trump appearing on the international stage and not think this man is literally unhinged, irresponsible, bizarre, bonkers, ludicrous. I don't even know why his staff are allowing him to stand in front of a mic at this point. It was completely incoherent. And, I have many other, let's say, less polite even responses, but he's completely undermining U.S. authority on the global stage. He's undermining global peace. He's calling into question the purpose of the UN. He canceled UN funding. And here he is lobbying to get a peace prize. And the man is literally cozying up to our foreign adversaries. I mean, it's wildly irresponsible. And I think it's
such a good analysis there. And you need to also understand, listen to the rest of this politics, most recent podcast if you have time. But they talk about how he's defunded. The Trump administration has massively defunded their funding to the UN, and that is affecting what the UN does hugely around the world. So the whole big beautiful bill, tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, and funding cuts to all sorts of programs through the UN, that is literally leading to people dying around the world, and yeah, it's just having a huge impact. The UN has been massively affected by that defunding. And then he goes in there and he slags off the UN, and then et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, it was a nuts interpretation of what happened. On the other hand, people like Sean Hannity think it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Laura Ingraham couldn't understand why people were. She said it's the most pivotal speech by an American president. Blah blah blah. She couldn't understand why Jim Shooter on CNN was saying that he was cerebrally challenged. Like, she was like, "This is the most pivotal speech." No, it's not, Laura Ingraham. You're just being a propaganda arm.
And by the way, he should. In 2023, we gave the UN some 13 billion taxpayer dollars, about 25% of their entire budget, and 75% of that contribution was voluntary. What do we have to show for it? A broken escalator, a broken teleprompter, and a world broken by war and a useless institution that pushes globalism. But the president was undeterred by the setbacks, proceeded to deliver what I actually believe was the best speech on the world stage I've ever seen him give. It was deep, it was impactful, it was profound. He spared no one from his truth-telling, friend or foe alike.
In other words, he slagged everyone off. He whinged, he whined, he said how amazing he was, and then he whinged some more. Then he said how brilliant he was. Then he whined a bit more, and then he whinged about something else, and he whined about something else, and he finished off with saying how he should get the Nobel Peace Prize. It was absolute pile of dog shite, and yet Sean Hannity dutifully does his bidding as a propaganda.
He challenged every
mouthpiece.
single globalist institution, starting with the UN itself, for their failures and outdated way of thinking. He laid out a new vision for the world. President Trump uniquely understands that the power, the might, and the purpose of this country, the United States of America, must be used as a force for good, and that's exactly what he is doing.
The force for good being Trump being the world dictator. Yeah, absolutely insane. So, and you get other people reacting. Will Chamberlain here, some kind of right-wing nut job, saying, watching it again, this is remarkably dangerous. If someone on the building wanted Trump assassinated, this would have been a great way to freeze him. The UN needs to go. PNG, the diplomat, seize the property, turn it into a new Trump hotel. This is a real anti-UN, anti-establishment sort of populist attack. And then finally, just incredible. This is, after all the things that happened, after Brian Kilmeade on Fox said that all homeless people that refuse care should be forcibly euthanized, should be literally lethally injected and killed. He said they should be killed. And all he did was apologize 3 days later, and nothing happened. Jimmy Kimmel makes a gag, which was actually misinterpreted and was a pretty decent build-up, as Joe Rogan admitted on his podcast. It was a good gag. It was funny. It built up to a very funny gag about construction being the fourth phase of grief. And Jimmy Kimmel gets kind of cancelled or suspended for blah, 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 blah. And yet Jesse Waters here, okay, he's joking, but like, this is a really febrile time, and saying stuff like this, I just think is deeply weird for a start, but also inappropriate and irresponsible.
And then they sabotage the teleprompter.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an insurrection. And what we need to do is either leave the UN or we need to bomb it. It is in New York, though, right?
Yeah,
there could be some fallout there.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Maybe gas it.
No.
Let's not do
Oh
that.
my
Gas it.
goodness.
Okay.
He's
But we
kidding,
need to
he's
destroy it. And then they
But we need to destroy it. Let's bomb it. Let's gas it. Okay, he's joking, but I don't know. People like this, I think, are just incredibly not useful, because they complain when the rhetoric is dodgy on the other side, and then they can either talk about forcibly euthanizing homeless people or blowing up and bombing and gassing the UN. And he says, okay, well, okay, that's a joke. Yeah, whatever. But we still need to destroy it. Okay, fair enough. So then we get on to Medvedev, who has also taken offense at Trump's post. So they seem to be picking up on this paper tiger issue, and they don't like it, the Russians. So Peskov last night said, we're not a paper tiger, we're a bear, and there are no paper bears. So that's the element of Trump's Truth Social post that Peskov honed in on. And actually Medvedev does something of the same thing here. So something is going on in New York, he says. The Banderite clown has coke and tremor. The Pole has snus in his mouth. So he's slagging off Zelensky for being on cocaine, and he's slagging off Sikorsky for having snus in his mouth, whatever that means. Trump has again entered an alternative reality and issued a batch of political spells on the topic how weak Russia is. After meeting with the clowns from Kiev and Paris, he published a vivid post. There is the final victory of Kiev, the return of previous borders, and the failed military economy of Russia, queues for gasoline, and the paper tiger. In this reality, everything is different. Kiev wins, Russia is torn to shreds, and the economy of the Banderite Ukraine confidently grows thanks to its own resources. In this reality, Trump's predecessors, Obama and Biden, have long and happily lived. But Trump is not like that. I have no doubt he will return. He always returns. Probably in a couple of days, he will offer the green pianist to sign a surrender, or fly to Mars with Musk, whom he pardoned, or do something else very important that will allow him to claim the Nobel Prize. I mean, that is quite a funny paragraph, because there's an element of or he might fly to Mars with Musk, whom he pardoned. So Musk, of course, attacked him over, and we're going to talk about that later, the Epstein files, and now appears to be best mates again, as if like that moral evaluation of how terrible the Epstein files are and that Trump's in it is now, it doesn't really matter now. It's not politically useful for me. Wow. The main thing is to frequently and radically change your point of view on various issues, and everything will be fine. This is the essence of successful state governance through social networks. And as they say, thank you for your attention to this subject. So interesting reply there from Medvedev, tongue firmly in cheek, but of course, there is truth in what he says, or there's a truth about his understanding of matters in what he says there in somewhat jest. Okay. We have the ISW talking, and I did mention this last night, about how Russia might be panicking here because they are trying to resurrect the START nuclear disarmament program with Trump that they have kind of given up on over the last couple of years due to the war in Ukraine. Putin pressures Trump on arms control to facilitate US rapprochement. So he wants, Putin this is, US concessions on sanctions, and in return, they can rebuild up this relationship of looking at each other's nuclear weapons and doing something about it, knowing that, one, Trump is quite scared about nuclear stuff. He's talked about it, long before he was president. That's one thing that is fairly consistent with Trump. And two, I think this shows you how, I think, vulnerable Russia are at the moment. I think they're economically and politically not in a good place. And if the US suddenly sound off like Trump did last night against Russia, then I think Putin starts worrying. His main trick that he can play, his card trick that he can play, the only kind of trick he has in his hand is keeping the US on side long enough that the rest of the world get bored, or they have elections that Russia interferes with, and you get AfD in Germany, reform in the UK, blah, blah, blah. Strings out the war long enough that the rest of the world get bored or get distracted, and then the US themselves get distracted, and then he prevails in Ukraine. So he's playing the time game. Now, if Trump then turns on a sixpence here and goes, well, screw you guys, I'm going home and I'm nothing to do with you. I'm going to leave it up to NATO, and we're going to help, but not overtly help. But we are going to help by providing a lot of weaponry. And if some of that weaponry ends up being Tomahawk cruise missiles or something, then Putin's got a lot to worry about. So there's a lot riding on exactly how the US proceed from what was said last night in Trump's Truth Social post. Now, he also, Trump, that is, met with Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, who said, quote, by 2027, and by the way, this is after like slagging off Europe for buying too much Russian hydrocarbons. Of course, this is coming from Hungary and Slovakia, but mainly Hungary, really. Slovakia are coming up with alternative options. I think, was it Zelensky might have been saying this yesterday, that Hungary, at least Slovakia, are trying to look at alternatives. Like they've signed a 10-year contract with Shell PLC to get alternative supplies of hydrocarbons, whereas Hungary appear to be just doubling down. But anyway, she says by 2027, Europe will have turned the page on Russian fuels for good. This announcement follows von der Leyen's conversation with US President Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly summit in New York. Trump publicly criticized European nations for continuing to buy Russian energy, arguing they were, quote, financing a war against themselves. European Council President Antonio Costa emphasized that the EU has already reduced Russian energy purchases by 80%. So they're only operating at 20% of what they were. Now, this still effectively means that they're giving billions of euros to Russia. There's still a lot of money going from Europe to Russia, but they have cut it back by 80%. And it's, you know, it's mainly, but not entirely, but it is mainly Hungary and Slovakia that are holding out. With Hungary, that has Russia-friendly government accounted for most of the remaining 20% of the imports. Slovakia a little bit, but it really is Hungary. Europe's 19th package of sanctions on Russia is on the way. Now, we had Nawrocki, who is a Polish president aligned with PIS, the Law and Justice Party, right-wing populists who are against Russia, but have been creeping slowly away from supporting Ukraine and more towards Russia, especially considering getting into bed with Confederation, the far-right populist party that are definitely aligned to Russia and against Ukraine. However, I think some of the polling has shown a shift maybe again back. I don't think Confederation are doing as well as they were. Anyway, Nawrocki speaking at the UN, I think, is important here because, quote, Russia is a state that considers itself above the law. Russia has imperial and colonial ambitions. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not just a regional conflict. The root causes are purely ideological. Russia treats entire nations as a colonial property is a summary of what he said. And that is a stinging rebuke of Russia. I mean, it's perfectly accurate. And he, as a kind of historian and amateur boxer, I believe, is he? But as a historian of these matters, he's very anti-German, anti-Nazi, and very anti-Soviet, like from a World War II point of view. And that kind of, I think, feeds a lot of his thinking otherwise. So that's why he doesn't like, say, the nationalism of, say, Stefan Bandera from Ukraine as much as he doesn't like, you know, your Stalins and Lenins and whatnot. So here he's going to town though on Russia's imperialism. Now, talking about right-wing populists, here is the AfD leader, Alice Weidel, from Germany. So she's in charge of the party that is veering more towards a Russian sphere of influence. She said, quote, Russia should behave de-escalatingly, and not violate NATO airspace. So this is in the context of Poland and Estonia having their airspaces violated, and not test the alliance's defenses. Somewhere, Putin must also move. Such actions undermine Trump's peace efforts. So I always find it when people talk about the peace efforts being Trump's peace efforts rather than just the peace efforts. So there's this, you get this a lot with people like, say, Reform in the UK, here AFD, which is appealing to Trump. There's this Trumpian river running through all of their, I think, actions and rhetoric. But anyway, saying that, really rebuking Russia here, which is good. That's good to see from the AFD, because I do worry. Right. Spain's Ministry of Defense has said that their military aircraft with their foreign minister, defense minister it might have been, on board, suffered GPS malfunction when flying near Russia's Kaliningrad exclave. It says enclave here, it's an exclave, isn't it? This is worrying, and it's not the first time. So we've had this with other leaders previously, and now we've got it with some of Spain's cabinet. So yeah, something needs to be done about that from a European point of view. Okay, just a little bit on sanctions and more corporations you can get angry with. Zara, who's a clothing manufacturer or a fashion giant, their exit, scare quotes, from Russia was never real. Inditex sold its stores to a Lebanese partner under a contract guaranteeing re-entry. Now Zara and other brands are back in Russian malls just 3 months after the CEO swore they wouldn't return. Sanctions loopholes and corporate greed equals business as usual, says the Euromaidan press. And then we're going to go to, as we finish up this section, Erdogan here. So Recep Erdogan, the Turkish leader, slight autocratic inclinations, said some interesting things with Brett Bayer on Fox.
So how does this come to an end? Much like Russia-Ukraine, how can this come to an end? Is there a deal that can be made?
Ben sadece şunu söyleyeyim.
I can only say this. Mr. Trump, you might remember he's used a term
Ukrayna savaşını
when
ben bitiririm.
he said, I will finish the Russia-Ukraine war.
Bitti mi?
Did it end?
Hala devam ediyor.
It still goes on.
Aynı şekilde
Similarly,
Gazze savaşını ben bitiririm.
he said, I will finish the war in Gaza.
Bitti mi?
Did it end?
Hayır.
No. That means
Demek ki
once we start analyzing the issue, there are prices to pay.
faturalar ödeniyor.
And when we look at the hostage exchange, that was done. It goes on. Do you?
Now, this is quite critical of Trump. And rightly so. He said he can solve the war in 24 hours, and he said he was going to solve the Israeli-Palestine conflict. But Erdogan is not obviously a fan of Israel and doesn't really like what Trump is doing there, and also straddles the fence on Ukraine, but is broadly supportive of Ukraine as a NATO ally. Does an awful lot by Raktar and other Baykar and other manufacturers are helping out Ukraine and so on and so forth. Now, he is effectively slagging off Trump on his own turf here on Fox News. Greg was saying that this happened before the announcement from Trump, and it was almost as if Erdogan knew what was coming. So maybe there was an understanding that Trump was going to pivot. But I just find that quite a revealing statement from someone who Trump really likes, because he's a strongman dictator type person. He's not a dictator, but he's going in that direction. It's kind of like Viktor Orban's Hungary. So yeah, I think that was quite a pointed set of statements there from Erdogan. Now, Don Bacon here. I'm not going to go through this because it's 7 minutes 40 worth of interview, but he's a Republican representative from Nebraska who is not running in the next election because I think he sees the writing on the wall. It's a swingy sort of district. He's probably not got. He's probably going to lose, and we're going to talk about massive swings in the polling at the moment, which even after Charlie Kirk has been killed, and you think, wow, the Republicans might get a resurgence. It doesn't look like that's happening. There was an election yesterday, that saw a massive swing to the Democrats. And so if the elections happen in the midterms, then the Democrats are probably, if things keep going as they are, and if the economy starts to bite more and more on the average voter, then you are going to see the Democrats sweep at least the House of Representatives. More difficult in the Senate due to who's up for it. Only a third of senators are up, and it depends what the mix is. But because he's retiring, he's now just feeling far more confident with slagging off the administration, and he does so, and he keeps doing it. So, retiring Republican in the swing district says Trump has missed the chance to unite the country. He centers on anger and opposition. Absolutely right. Like, the talk about hate at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, I think, was just really disgraceful. He faults Trump on the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. So all this stuff about Jimmy Kimmel, but more so about, court cases and all the shenanigans going on with regard to the media in the US. That's not cool. He says tariffs are hurting his voters. He says, and he talks about his own, he talks about combine harvester manufacturers that are in his district that are having to go to Europe now to build their stuff to then send it to Canada. So they're no longer building them in Nebraska. They're going to go to Europe because of the tariffs. It's like, we're losing jobs. He says Trump is lacking moral clarity on Russia. Now, this is key. Don Bacon is one of the most supportive of Ukraine in the Republican caucus, right? And he is getting more and more frustrated with Trump. He slagged off Trump the other day very clearly on Russia. He said he's worse on Russia than Biden. So won't say if Trump's character is what he wants in a president. And I assume that means, no, that's not the sort of character. I keep thinking about this. Like, I don't know if I'm still going to be debating Trump with one of the viewers who said, look, I'm a Trump supporter, although I support Ukraine, but I think Trump is the best president on everything outside of Ukraine. I accept that on Ukraine he's not good, but on everything else, particularly freedom of speech, he is the best. And I'm like, at the moment, I'm like, can you really even build a case that he's good on freedom of speech? Like, you literally can't. So it's like, I don't know how you are going to make an argument for this. But one of the arguments I want, if I was to just have a debate with anyone now, like a live debate on a podium about Trump and whether Trump is a good president or not, I think I would start off with talking about whether Trump is the sort of person I would aspire to want to be, and whether I would want my children to look up to Trump to be the sort of person, to be that sort of person. Would I want my children to look at Trump and say, that's who I want to be as a child, and me as a father say, that's who I would want you to be. I would want you to be that person. And it's like, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that would ever be the case. Like, he's absolutely, like, I just think his personality is horrendous. So before we get on to how good he is as a leader, as a politician, he's just not a nice person. It's just like, publicly at a rally to give fellatio to a microphone as he did, like, what are you doing? And to pretend to be a disabled person, to ridicule disabled people when he ridiculed that disabled reporter. It's like, would I want my child to be like that person? No, I wouldn't actually. So and I think everything goes from there. It's like, this is you as a human being, as a person, as a character, as a personality, like, and then these are all the things you do. But the things you do kind of emanate from the person you are. Like, if I was the president of the United States or the prime minister in the UK, I would hope that my sense of morality and my sense of common decency would be what drove me to make the decisions I do while I'm leading the country. That you're led by your sense of morality. If your sense of morality is completely lacking or malformed, then you are going to be lacking and malformed in your decisions and your understanding of how the country should be run. But anyway, that last point, I think, is actually really, really significant. So if a Republican can't say that Trump's character is what he would look for in a president, then I think that tells you everything you need to know. Right. Now we're going to finish off this section with something that's, I haven't reported, but I almost did. So in Europe, we have something called the Eurovision Song Contest, which is this really camp, extravagant singing contest that ends up just being a political voting thing where, you know, Greece will vote for Cyprus or whatever, and you know, Sweden will vote for Norway, and Norway votes for Sweden. No one votes for the UK because everyone hates the UK, especially since we Brexited, blah blah blah. But it is a visual feast, and it is it's Marmite. You either love it or hate it, right? But it's a kind of institution in Europe. Russia were kicked out because of the war. And they don't like that. So they started up this thing called Intervision. And it's just been on. And it's just all these ne'er-do-well countries getting involved. Australia were going to have, with a Greek Australian was going to be singing there or something. And then they had to pull out because it was all too controversial. So you get like, I don't know, China, Russia, Iran, I don't know, these people singing at this singing contest, right? Russian propaganda state television, TASS, or state media outlet TASS, claimed that 4 billion people watched its Eurovision Song Contest rival Intervision, which is hilarious. And then they ended up changing it because obviously that's not true. They didn't quietly change a headline. That was a headline to say it was available to Intervision available to 4 billion viewers. A bit like saying, I don't know, I've released this film. We made this film, right? It's an absolute dog shite film, right? But it's available to 7 billion people on Earth. Anyone can watch it. Anyone can watch it, and a trillion aliens who are nearby as well, in nearby galaxies. And they can all come down and watch it. In fact, I think because the universe is possibly infinite, it's actually available to infinite amounts of life forms. I've made a film that infinite people have watched, can watch. It's complete nonsense. So, yeah, whatever. The number wasn't actual viewership, but simply the sum of the population of all participating countries, including giants like India and China. Well, there's 2 billion people watching it. Other participants included Russia-friendly nations like Belarus, Serbia, Cuba, Kenya, Brazil, Ethiopia, and South Africa. So it's like a BRICS singing contest. Intervision is Russia's answer to the European Eurovision, from which Moscow was excluded in 2022 due to the invasion of Ukraine. The Russian version promotes what organizers call traditional values. Now, Eurovision is very camp. So, sorry, we don't have this. There it is. There. So Eurovision is very camp. And if you are offended by LGBT stuff, then it's probably not your cup of tea, as quite a few of the entrants usually fit that bill. You can imagine that Russia would be all about traditional family values, because that now LGBT, etc., is effectively outlawed as terrorism. So if you advocate for sexual pluralism, in the same way that if advertisers feature, for example, gay people, or if advertisers even vaguely kind of promote not having children, like in some way implicitly celebrate childlessness, then they are deemed, both of those things are deemed as illegal in Russia now, because they've really gone back to traditional values where they've looked at the demographics. So we need children, so you can't be gay because that's against Christian morals, and you have to have children. And anything that goes against that narrative, I'm sorry, that's now seen as equivalent to terrorism. It's absolutely extraordinary. Right, we're going to go on to a whole section on Moldova, but let's just make sure you guys are all right in the chat. Thank you very much to Kevin Forst for his support of the channel. Always very generous. So thank you, Kevin. Genuinely mean that. As I keep saying, I'm sorry I'm doing so much content today, particularly. It's just crazy times at the moment. Now, we do need to talk a little bit about Moldova, because Moldova is obviously borders Ukraine. It has Transnistria, that annexed area with 1,500 soldiers and more ammunition than you could poke a hairy stick at. So Ukraine really want to get hold of that ammunition. Russia really want to get hold of that ammunition, but it's kind of stuck in Transnistria because they can't transport it anywhere. And Moldova is itself, just like Romania, very much in the crosshairs of Russian disinformation. Now, Moldova detained, I think yesterday or the day before, 74 people, 2 days ago, 74 people allegedly trained in Serbia on firearms and protest provocation tactics ahead of parliamentary elections, which I believe are on the 28th of September. So they're just coming up this weekend. Officials said Russian security services coordinated the operation with links to local political parties discovered. And so you have not just informational interference from Russia, but genuine, tangible interference in terms of training people who are trained up to be agents provocateurs that will probably cause, upset in terms of protests and violence and whatnot. James, with this content, I really am spoiling you. It turns out I am an ambassador, and I will offer you plenty. Or no, you need to offer me, actually. No, I would offer you. Who's the ambassador here? Maybe you're the ambassador, and I need to offer you Ferrero Rocher. Anyone that hasn't seen the advert is obviously not going to understand what the hell I'm talking about. Right, so back to Moldova. In Moldova, more than 100 people were detained, as we heard. So Russian-backed plans to incite mass riots and destabilize the country around a critical parliamentary election, says Anton Gerashenko. So Victor Fortuna, Moldova's chief prosecutor from the Office for Combating Organized Crime and Special Cases, said the suspects had traveled to Serbia. As mentioned, they underwent training. Investigators alleged they were taught tactics for breaking through police cordons, methods of resistance, and the use of batons and firearms. Moldovan police stated that some of the detainees had been trained inside Moldova itself, while only those instructed by Russian citizens were sent to Serbia. The Moldovan intelligence and security service reported that the operation was coordinated by a handler who presented himself as an officer of the Russian Special Service under the alias Bez. Did he have maracas, and was he dancing for the Happy Mondays? There's another reference that not many people are going to get. It is also reported that the GRU, Russian Special Services officer, was involved in the coordination using a criminal network for recruitment. So this is all very, very worrying. So media reveal alleged Russian plot to influence Moldovan parliamentary elections. So on top of that, documents have been seen by Bloomberg that outline a multi-layered strategy reportedly coordinated directly by the Kremlin to interfere with the elections. Here, Gerashenko says that Russia, this is Maya Sandu, and he's got a video of Maya Sandu. It's a 3-minute video that he's subtitled, but essentially, Russia doesn't act alone. The Kremlin has allies in Moldova, people who have repeatedly proven in the past that for money, they would sell even their own country. They have no homeland. They've only got masters. They don't believe in Russia or in Europe. They believe only in money. So that is a challenge for them because, unfortunately, people are easily bought. I would suggest. Okay, the next one. This is Derek Tanis, who's a really good Romanian source, and we dipped into a lot of what he was saying during the Romanian presidential elections. Okay, this evening, Maya Sandu, the pro-EU president of Moldova, delivered an unprecedented address to the nation following today's large-scale arrests of pro-Russian agents across the country. Quote, in all solemnity, I have to inform you that the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity and future of our country are in grave and immediate danger. The Kremlin has spent hundreds of millions in an attempt to destabilize and spread violence and fear across Moldova. I'm addressing all loyal citizens. Do not permit the surrender of our country. Russia is not acting alone. There are many accomplices here in Moldova, traitors to their homeland that will sell it for a profit, as they have done before. These men don't have a country. They don't believe in Europe or in Russia, and they believe in nothing but money. The Kremlin believes that we are all for sale, that we are too small and few to resist, that we're not even a country, but Moldova is a country and is our home, and we will defend it. Now, last elections, when it was her presidential election and when they held a referendum on Europe, she was relying on the diaspora community. It's kind of the inverse of Romania. So the diaspora community of Moldovans abroad voted overwhelmingly for pro-EU for her and for EU membership, accession to the EU. In Romania, it was the other way around. The diaspora community voted against, weirdly, they voted for Euroscepticism. And remember, I was speaking to that taxi driver, that Romanian taxi driver who drove me back from the pub one night. And he was like proper anti-Ukraine, proper anti-Nicosur Dan, and so on and so forth. And it was a fascinating, like 15-minute taxi drive where I was like, oh my goodness, and yet you're living in the UK. So there's this weird scenario where the Romanian diaspora community were far more ultra-nationalist, whereas the Moldovan diaspora community are the other way round. Worth mentioning, says Derek Tanis, Moldova will hold parliamentary elections this Sunday, which, if the pro-Russians win, will likely put an end to Moldova as an independent state. So there's that much on the line, says Derek Tanis there. I mean, it is a worrying time for Moldova. So Sikri Mursan says, this is not a Netflix series. It's happening right now in the Republic of Moldova. Russia is pouring hundreds of millions of euros into influencing the elections on Sunday, funding networks via crypto and Russian banks to bribe voters, spreading propaganda and disinformation with AI tools, and even planning riots to destabilize the country if pro-European forces win. Moldova's democracy and European security are at serious risk. The best defense, massive participation at the polls, including from the Moldovan diaspora. So again, that's the big call there. Only the citizens of Moldova, not the Kremlin, should decide their country's future. And then War Translated says, Russia seems to have begun warming up pro-Russian voters ahead of the parliamentary elections on September the 28th. In particular, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service claimed that NATO was preparing a landing in Ukraine's Odessa region to intimidate Transnistria. So all this absolute nonsense disinformation. You know, TASS saying Europe is preparing to occupy Moldova, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service reported. At this stage, the concentration of NATO armed forces units in Romania near the Moldovan borders is being carried out, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service stated, so on and so forth. You know, really worrying Moldovans that this is all about NATO, and if you vote for pro-EU candidates, then you're going to get NATO and invasion and blah, etc., etc. It's all a load of nonsense, but people are susceptible to that kind of rhetoric. Now, finally, we're going to go, well, almost finally, we're going to go to Derek Tanis again. So while the political implications of a Russian takeover of Moldova seem to be largely understood, the military threat this poses to Ukraine is largely dismissed. I believe that is not at all the case, and we should be quite a lot more concerned with it. Currently, Moldova's intelligence service, SIS, applies an extra security filter that, with a lot of effort, I might add, turns back anywhere from tens of hundreds of Russian men of fighting age trying to get into Moldova via air almost on a daily basis. These tourists, scare quotes, and athletes, scare quotes, usually make their way into Chisinau via flights from Turkey. If the SIS checks are removed, hundreds of Russian soldiers can and will arrive in Moldova daily. I'll let you know, you do the math to how much that amounts to in just a matter of weeks. While a Russian ground offensive via Moldova into Ukraine is still out of the question, small incursions and drones being launched against Odessa, some 30 kilometers away, are a very real possibility. If nothing else, the mere threat will force Ukraine to reposition troops and assets. The idea of a quick and cost-free Ukrainian incursion that takes care of the problem is childish. Decrepit and as the armament found in Transnistria and Moldova is, there is more than enough of it to mount a costly defense around larger urban areas. Urban centers that will cost a lot of lives. So the idea that Ukraine could invade Transnistria, he says, is a non-starter. While the population of Moldova will have no appetite to fight for Russia, the population of Transnistria, anywhere from 300k to 500k, half of which Russian ethnics, brainwashed and brought up on the idea of an imminent NATO and Romanian invasion, quite possibly will. So that is a worry. And then we're finally going to go in this section to a guy called Potra. Now, if you remember, I've talked about him before. If you remember, that's Bolter, the guy who murdered Melissa Hortman, the state senator in Minnesota. So if you remember, he was a white Christian nationalist, Republican, Trump supporting, blah, blah, blah. But although some Trump supporters keep claiming he was a Tim Walz appointee and he was therefore a Democrat, blah, blah, blah. Absolute nonsense. So you have this Vance Bolter guy who was a deep, deep Trump supporting guy who would go to Africa. And I played you some videos of him doing some like sermons at a church. He was like really uber Christian fundamentalist. But he was involved in security abroad. And there were connections. So there were claims that there were connections of Vance Bolter to the Russians via Potra. I did a video on it, and it was quite in depth, and it was really fascinating, I thought, and not from what I said, but from what my sources were saying. And in fact, Derek Tanis was, I think, maybe one that was talking about this. But Potra is this guy that is a go-between between some of these different entities, and he's been involved in upsetting stuff in Russia. I think he was the security guy for Georgescu, who was banned from running in the end in Romania. This was his security guy, but he's got his fingers in a lot of pies. Anyway, he's a fugitive pro-Russian mercenary leader, and he attempted to violently overthrow Romania's constitutional order. So he was arrested in Dubai alongside his son just now. Both of them are soon to be brought back to Romania, where they face up to 25 years in prison, because he was involved in all sorts in Romania. And there was that connection to Vance Bolter. Anyway, that has happened. Right. Okay. Now we're going to go on to Hungary. I hope you guys are okay. You're still with me. Thank you. Almost 550 of you there. Thank you for getting your news here. So Hungary will keep buying Russian oil despite Trump's demand to stop, said Peter Szijjártó, the foreign minister. He said it's impossible to secure supplies without Russia. He said, although most of the rest of Europe does, but it's impossible for Hungary. Okay, interesting. Hungary and Slovakia remain the EU states most reliant on Russian crude, but I think it's overwhelmingly Hungary and Slovakia are looking at alternatives, facing growing pressure from Brussels, Washington, and partners to cut ties. That was the other day, but actually, there's another one from Noel Reports today saying Hungary has no intention of giving up Russian oil imports, even if Trump demands it, says Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó. So that's being said again. Trump said in New York at the UN, the meeting after Zelensky, said, I think Orban will stop buying Russian oil. If I talk to him, I'll talk to him. What I've been asking for is that exactly that happens. Your man, Trump, needs to go and speak to Orban because he has that relationship. He has that ability to influence Orban in a way that the EU doesn't. Orban is Eurosceptic. If the EU comes, if Ursula von der Leyen comes to him and says, right, Vicky, we've got to sit down and have a chat about oil, he's going to say, oh, von der Leyen, do a runner, not interested because EU. Whereas if Trump comes and says, right, Vicky, we need to sit down and we need to talk oil, he's been welcomed to Mar-a-Lago, given a red carpet treatment. He's been treated as a hero of Europe by Trump on a routine basis. Trump has a lot of currency with Orban. So it's interesting that even though Trump said that, Szijjártó has come back and said, nah, we're not changing. Now, the 19th sanction package is to leave Russian oil flows via the Druzhba pipeline untouched. That's interesting. They're not going to sanction the Druzhba pipeline that comes through Ukraine to Hungary, but Ukraine have been bombing that or hitting it with drones and missiles north of the border in Russia. It also gets oil from, or I don't know if it's refined products from Belarus that then come down through the Druzhba, then through into Hungary and Slovakia. Anyway, the latest measures will target two Russian energy giants, Rosneft and Gazprom, but neither company plays a significant role in supplying oil via this pipeline, according to the European Commission. So there is that. Then we have, I don't know why my tabs are not. So the other night, huge protests in Budapest. So thousands of protesters were at Viktor Orban's state-funded. Were in Budapest protesting Orban's state-funded propaganda, hate campaigns, and vilification of rivals. This is what Trump is doing in the US, by the way, at the moment. Trump is, and I'm sure it's purposeful, but the Heritage Foundation has very, very strong connections to Hungary and to Viktor Orban. And Trump's blueprint through the Heritage Foundation does look like exactly what Viktor Orban did, getting the media on side, defunding state media, changing their narratives, getting, control of the media, control over the judiciary, internal security services, ICE, whatever. They appear to be just creating a parallel to Viktor Orban. Now, these guys are protesting against that, while in the United States, it seems that the US is going in a direction that is more and more aligned to Viktor Orban's project and journey towards autocracy. One tragic case, says Shabalix Pani, a police chief in an opposition-run city died by suicide after being targeted in a vile smear campaign by a pro-government outlet. So yeah, there were huge protests the other night, which is good news for the opposition leader Peter Magyar, who is doing very well in the polls at the moment. So there's some pretty and good to see Ukrainian flag right in the middle there. EU flags. This is kind of where it's at. They want Hungary to re-embrace their Western orientation whilst also supporting Ukraine, which is not at all what Orban is doing. Hungarian, says Shabadon Magyarul, says Hungarians are just so ready to oust Orban and return back to Western democracies and values. 202 days left. Don't give up on us, please. Thank you for all your support. I don't know if we've got F Oink in the live chat. I know he is on my chats in the video. Oh, yes, you are there. So we're talking, like, I presume you still live in Hungary. F Oink, what's your view, if you can put it in the live chat, as to what's going on there? If you were to give me a barometer reading of the Hungarian population now and what the chances of the opposition winning, I would appreciate that. But of course, knowing that this comes from just you as an anecdotal opinion. Hungary and Slovakia were not invited to the September 26th. Hey, September the 26th, let me tell you, is the greatest day on earth. What happens? Oh yeah, it's born then. Yeah, that was it. So they were not invited to September the 26th EU video conference on creating a drone wall along the bloc's eastern border. The meeting, called by EU Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius, will include Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, plus Ukraine. So there are all these nations around these two, but Slovakia and Hungary were not invited to this drone wall video conference. I find that pretty interesting. And then finally here on this subject of Hungary, Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys says the EU should activate Plan B to bypass Hungary's veto, blocking Ukraine's accession talks. He stressed Ukraine meets the criteria, warned against becoming hostages to Budapest, and confirmed informal negotiations could begin this autumn to keep up the momentum. Now, there have been talks about Plan B and Plan C. Kaja Kallas has talked about this for a long time. And we haven't really seen it materialize at all. So I hope there are ways of getting around Hungary's difficult actions. But yeah, as I say, no sign of that as of yet. Okay, F Oink here says, people are fed up with the corruption. They feel the bad economy in their wallets. So it's worth noting that Viktor Orban's Hungarian economy is one of the worst operating economies in Europe. And the corruption is I think they're the worst in Europe, or in the EU. So if the elections are fair, I expect there is a 60 to 65 chance that Orban is defeated by Magyar Peter. That's the key. If the elections are fair part, because he will be working so damn hard to make sure that they are not fair. And that's what people are worried about in the US, and we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end of this video. I know I've been going on a long time, but so much information to throw at you in the hope that some of it finds fertile ground. Right, what do we have here? Right, we're going to talk about Argentina just briefly. So back on July the 23rd, Niall Ferguson, who's a controversial historian, I think he's a right-wing historian in the UK, and he's not everyone's cup of tea. Back in July, he said, the world has never seen a government more radically libertarian than Javier Milei's. But the amazing thing is not that it is working economically, Alan Smith would say, I told you so. The true miracle is that Milei's shock therapy is working politically. That's what he said in July the 23rd. Now, just to give you a sense of what's going on in Argentina, and I'm no expert, but you had I think the last government was more left wing, more socialist or social democrat aligned government, or maybe the one before that. But anyway, you've had pretty kind of establishment political parties running Argentina, and it's been getting into more and more economic trouble to the point where it was all falling apart. And Javier Milei came along as an anarcho-capitalist libertarian. So this guy that, like, I don't believe in government, basically, and I'm going to come in. You remember the chainsaw thing, and then you had Elon Musk with the chainsaw thing when Javier Milei was at the CPAC conference as well. This chainsaw thing, that he's going to take a chainsaw to Argentina's government and basically sack all the civil servants and then cut all regulation and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, right, admittedly, you might have a bit of pain before it gets better. And then there was a lot of pain, and inflation was at insane levels, but then it started to look a little better. And then some indicators were like, actually, Milei's approach could be working. And so it's been a bit up and down. But then it looks like now it's not really working. And he then got pasted, I think, in a Buenos Aires local elections, where I think his party did not do well. And, so Niall Ferguson reposted that the Treasury Secretary, this is just quite interesting, because the Treasury, but essentially the long and the short of it is the US, America first, US, not interested in other people around the world, America first, don't want to be spending money in Ukraine, America first. We don't want to be helping out our allies too much, America first. We want to be worried about they're bailing out Argentina. So what's going on there? They're putting things in place to bail out a country. So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Argentina is a systematically important US ally in Latin America, and the US Treasury stands ready to do what is needed within its mandate to support Argentina. All options for stabilization are on the table. And then he goes on. To which Niall Ferguson reposted that. So on the one hand, he's saying, look how amazing Argentina is. Not only is it an economic miracle, it's a political miracle. And then it all goes wrong. And he's like, well done for America for getting them out of this absolute hellhole that we're in. Oh, I thought you told us it's a political and economic miracle. Okay, right. Well done, mate. So Niall Ferguson can go and do one. Anyway, America first now means giving Argentina's banks a bailout. So the Trump administration pledged on Monday to do whatever it is necessary to support Argentina's struggling economy, throwing a lifeline to the country's embattled president, Javier Milei, ahead of legislative elections there next month. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the United States is prepared to offer loans to Argentina's central bank, direct currency purchases and purchases of US dollar-denominated Argentine government debt from Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund to keep Argentina's economy afloat. The value of Argentina's currency, the peso, has fallen in recent weeks amid concerns about Mr. Milei's political grip on the government. Quote, Argentina is a systematically important US ally in Latin America, and the US Treasury stands ready to do what's needed within its mandate to support Argentina. That was Scott Bessent. Okay, so breaking news. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said all options are on the table, blah, blah, blah. Again, why do Americans have to bail out Milei? This is precisely what Elon Musk and Marco Rubio promised Trump wouldn't do. And yet, Trump administration is offering a financial lifeline to Argentina's Milei. Elizabeth Warren says, as a US Democratic senator, first, Trump made us pay higher coffee and beef prices to support a convicted coup plotter in Brazil. Now he wants American taxpayers to bail out his friend Milei in Argentina. Trump should stop raising prices for Americans and giving away our money to his corrupt buddies. Fair point there. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting. So the Tennessee Holler here says, pretty good explanation as to why Trump is bailing out his loyal puppet buddy Milei in Argentina. America first, folks, where you at? And who does this for us when our chickens come home to roost? Okay, so Ben Norton, whoever he is, says, actually existing libertarianism. Argentina's economy is in freefall under libertarian leader Javier Milei. The currency is collapsing, the bond market is in crisis, the huge bubble he inflated in the stock market has popped, and manufacturing output, i.e. the real economy, has crashed. Milei was already gifted a $42 billion lifeline from the US-controlled IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, after Argentina already owed more debt to the IMF than any other country. So they've already been bailed out by the IMF and World Bank. But even that was not enough to stabilize Milei's crazy Austrian school experiment. To explain, the Austrian school is this purely libertarian free market world of economic theory, where you've got was it Hayek and Van Mises, these Austrian economists who just basically that then brought about the Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys economic idea that, you know, the free market is everything and you shouldn't at all get involved in a free market. Of course, that's what most Republicans think, or at least they used to think until Trump came in. And now he's like, tariff. You can't say this. We're going to stop Jimmy Kimmel doing this. We're going to regulate that. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's like, hang on. I thought you guys were dead against government involvement and government overreach. And now you're saying the government should get involved all over the shop. More on that in a minute. And not only are they getting involved all over the shop, but they're getting involved in a country that is trying to be an Austrian school experiment, right? A free market experiment. And it's failed. And now they're being bailed out by not even their government, by an even bigger government. Anyway, so now the US government is pledging to bail out the proud self-declared anarcho-capitalist Milei by giving him even more money through US swap lines and buying Argentina's bonds and currency with US Treasury funds. The important part here, the US government is doing this not only to prop up one of its most loyal puppets in Latin America, but also in order to benefit wealthy US investors who hold Argentine stocks and bonds and US corporations that want Argentina's lithium. So follow the money, of course. All his mateys have got a lot of money invested in Argentina. They might have some useful lithium there as well. But also, like, Milei is just one of the buddies. He's one of the guys. He turns up at the CPAC at these conservative conferences with a freaking chainsaw. And he's getting bailed out. And stuff like this is just delightful. So end wokeness is one of these sources on these Twitter handles that is like horrendously MAGA. Okay, it's like, holy shit, Argentina just elected Javier Milei as their next president. History has been made today. Back in 2023, Elon Musk says prosperity is ahead for Argentina. And it's like, I wonder what you're saying now. How cool are you with the US bailing out Argentina? And how cool are you with your opinions that history is going to be made today and that prosperity lies ahead from Argentina when they've been absolutely bankrolled by the IMF, the World Bank, and now the United States? Like, there's no sense of contrition ever from these people that say these huge claims. Like, just throw a hand grenade into a hornet's nest all the time. Say these things, and there's no sense of accountability for what they say. I know this is just a Twitter handle, but this is an incredibly important one, end wokeness. It's quoted by so many Republican politicians and people like Elon Musk. It's just like, please, I'd love someone to come out and apologize for saying, oh, do you know what I said then? And what I said for those few weeks? Yeah, turns out I got it wrong. No one ever says that. That's so frustrating. Anyway, on to pastures new here. So there are a lot of tabs here, but I'm actually going to race through some of this fairly quickly because we've been through a bit of this, but we're now on to US politics. I said I'm going to spread my wings for this. A lot of, we'll do a few bits and pieces here. We're going to start with, again, sort of Charlie Kirk, but not really going to dwell on that. Just the whole kind of, okay, I've already told you Charlie Kirk was anti-Ukraine, right? We know that. And then I just wanted to, oh no, that was going to come later. Okay, let's talk about that now. So one of the kind of indicators that I think the Trump administration and the American political landscape at the moment is in trouble is just this. This is the data point here. And I was reading a guy who was involved in this. But anyway, the headline is that under the Trump administration, the Justice Department has reduced its number of anti-corruption lawyers. I mean, I'd love to have asked you this question blind. It's like, there were 36 anti-corruption lawyers when Trump took over. How many anti-corruption lawyers in the American government do you think there is now? They got rid of 5 of them, 6 of them? They got more of them. They've got rid of all of them but 2. So 34 out of the 36 anti-corruption lawyers have been purged. What does that tell you about the government and what it wants to do? You had Pete Hegseth purge the Pentagon of all of their JAGs, all of their lawyers. And then the Pentagon decided to blow up a bunch of Venezuelan boats with no due process committing war crimes. Literally murdered civilians from Venezuela in another country's waters or in international waters. You're like, how can you do? Oh, I know how you've done that. You've got rid of all the lawyers, so there's no accountability. No one's checking. So the JAGs would check that you can do things before you do them, right? You go, right, are we okay with doing this? What's the legality of striking this thing, using this munition, blah, blah, blah. Turns out they got rid of all the lawyers. It's like, who should we ask? Should we ask a caretaker? Oi, Jim. Oh, Jim can't hear. What? Oh, Doris. Hey, are we all right to blow up that Venezuelan boat? Hearing aid's not working. I think she said yes. Oh, we killed 11 people. Oh, Doris, are we okay to embezzle all that money again, like we wanted to do in Trump 1.0, but the lawyers stopped us? Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, just get rid of the lawyers and then you can do it. All right, thanks, Doris. Good idea. Right, let's get rid of the lawyers. Bish, bash, bosh. Right, we can do anything now. Happy days. It's just Anyway, that was a sidebar. I got that one in the wrong place. So I just wanted to remind you that there was this massive movement of people, if you like, or no, I guess the question is there a massive movement of people? So we had 100,000 people going to this, give or take, going to this memorial service in this stadium. And these people, I mean, it was very moving at parts, but then other parts were just like Stephen Miller gave a Nazi address and Donald Trump gave a normal, typical rally. And you're like, guys, this is a memorial service. Someone's been killed. Can I show some decency? You've got, the claim here is I finally got to watch a memorial service. I'm going to tell you why 200,000 people showed up instead of the 100,000 that was expected, and 100 million people streamed this, blah, 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 etc., etc. Okay, I'm not taking away from this. I'm wondering where this goes because, and I asked this when I did my reaction video to this, which was, is this a distillation of people who were already going to be like this kind of person? Or have they drawn people and are they generating a movement that is going to have political impact outside of this particular area? How long will this go on for? And I think those are really interesting questions I would love answered. And then I came across this today, and this blew my mind actually quite a bit. So I don't know if you remember, I was showing you but again, you could say, well, you showed us things like this before the election in November, and it had no effect on the election outcome. So I was showing you stadiums where Kamala Harris was getting loads of people. It was packed to the rafters. Everyone was like having a great time. And I would show you stadiums of Trump talking, and actually they weren't that full. And they closed off parts, and the whole top layers weren't full. But he ended up winning the election, so it doesn't really matter. But, you look at this picture, as you can see in front of you, and you're thinking, okay, it was packed to the rafters. But when Trump spoke, and bearing in mind it was quite a long day, this wasn't just a quick hour and a half memorial. This was a very long event. When Trump spoke, which was after Erica, the widow, spoke, actually, the crowd was very different. So here is a bit of a TikTok show. Stadium was full until, so it was genuinely packed.
Before he was murdered, Charlie received these.
So this is while Trump is speaking. Literally, you can see him on the video feed there. So this is not like doctored or anything. When Trump was speaking, actually a huge amount of people had left and were leaving and just were leaving in
Charlie
torrents.
received his reason because he was winning, and he was winning big. He was taking. And he did hold that torch high. We will never, ever let it fail. We will never let it fail. But we're going to.
Now, I'm guessing something like 50% of the crowd had left or were leaving there. And I find that fascinating because I'm wondering whether this can be turned into a political movement. If I was a Republican strategist, I'd be like, right, we've got to capitalize on this. And they did. And they were registering people. And it was basically, it's sad to say, but it was. And Greg Terry was saying this last night as well, as a Republican, although he said something odd. He was talking about Republicans as if he wasn't one last night. Don't know if anyone else picked up on that. I found that pretty fascinating. But this was treated like a political rally. So I'm thinking this could be used, there could be political capital here, and you drive a movement. And lots of people have been talking about that from the Republican side. They're saying Democrats are going to lose. This was a day that the Democrats lost the 2028 election. This was a day that the left were defeated, right? And part of me is thinking, oh, actually, there could be something in this. And then you look, and half the people have left when Trump is speaking, because actually he's quite a dull speaker, Trump. I think rhetorically, he isn't nearly what he was, and I don't think he's ever been as good as people think he was. But it's just that he says stuff that people like. But I don't think rhetorically he's good at what he says. Yeah, people like his kind of humor, but I think he could deliver it in a lot more of an effective style. Anyway, you can get stuff like this when he's hugging Erica. Who the hell makes that face when they're hugging a grieving widow when she's crying into him? Anyway, I don't know, but. I found that pretty interesting, and we're going to return just in a second. We're going to divert, and then we're going to return to this idea as to whether there's political capital that has been gained from the death of Charlie Kirk. And I know that it's a moral thing. I'm trying to move it away to a political strategy thing, understanding that underneath that all, there's a human that's been killed with a grieving family, etc. I'm not trying to be inhumane, but this is... as according to the people who turned up, people like Laura Loomer, Benny Johnson, blah, 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 they were talking about it as it was a political rally. We are going to register more Republicans here than we've ever seen before, blah, blah, blah. And they had the registration tables out. So, yeah, you can criticize me for talking about it in political terms, but they were doing it themselves, right? So that's how we're going to understand this. Now, I think also what happened there is you had Charlie Kirk, not on purpose, although there will be conspiracy theories that are talking about this. But Charlie Kirk's death has almost entirely succeeded in getting rid of the Epstein files scandal. We're going to talk about that in a second as well. We're going to draw two threads together here. Elon Musk said, how can people be expected to have faith in Trump if he won't release the Epstein files? That's what he said in August. And yet, at the end of September, actually, no, that's July. Americans do it the wrong way around. Just 2 months later, he's back holding hands with Donald Trump at the Charlie Kirk Memorial, sitting behind that glass. They're back together. They're best friends again. So that kind of moral evaluation that the Epstein files are such a horrific scandal and Trump's going to go down for it or whatever is now just a distant memory for Elon Musk. He didn't really care about the morality of that. It was just about power struggles. I find it, I love this. So a satirical bronze statue called Best Friends Forever has appeared at the National Mall in Washington, D.C., depicting Trump and Epstein holding hands. The anonymous artist said it was displayed in honor of Friendship Month, mocking Trump's past ties to Epstein. I love that. But in reality, Kirk and these other things that are happening in the news are doing a pretty good job of getting the American public to largely forget about Epstein, and I'm worried about that. However, something happened last night, and this brings both the thread of whether there's political capital gain for the Republicans with Charlie Kirk's death, and whether the Epstein files have been forgotten. But both those things come together quite incredibly. So what happened last night? So we know that the House of Representatives is on a knife edge, that the Republicans have a wafer-thin margin of only a couple of people. And so if a bill comes up and a couple of people cross the aisle to vote and all the Democrats vote as one and a couple of Republicans vote, then the Republicans fail to get the bill through. And if something like Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna's discharge petition, which is a bill that they can force through due to technical things, on the Epstein files, they have got 4 Republicans, right? So they have Thomas Massie himself, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace, right? So, and that leaves them one short of what they need to get the discharge petition for Epstein files to be published, to be put through. And there's a number of I think there were 3 empty seats in the House of Representatives due to people dying and stuff like that. And those seats are being filled by Democrats. And there are 2 things we can look at here. We can look at what is the shift in voter proportions. Is there a swing from one side to the other? Does Charlie Kirk have an effect? And we can look at what's that going to do to the discharge petition. Last night, Adelita Grijalva won the special election in Arizona's 7th congressional district. And not only does this give Democrats one more seat in the House, but it is the last signature needed to force a vote to release the Epstein files. So this is potentially absolutely huge. So you had an election, a special election that took place that was won by a Democrat. Now, Democrat is probably going to win it anyway, but the swing was massive. So the Democrat won 70.6% to 27.7%. So that is essentially a, what's that, 43% win? A 43% win in Arizona. Even after Charlie Kirk's memorial, Democrats won by a massively large margin. Sorry, I didn't have that up for you. That's the margin there. It's absolutely phenomenal. Now, the question is, well, what's the swing? Is there a swing? So Vance Ulrich here says a pretty ominous sign for those who are banking on the Latino vote to be realigning with the GOP long term, in my opinion. So what happened in the November elections last year is the Latino vote has been traditionally a Democrat vote, but it didn't really go as much to the Democrats as they were hoping. And the black vote a little bit, although not as much as some people are saying, also drifted a little bit towards Republicans. I think as you start getting 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generation voters, then they start settling down to not being so partisan. But with sort of 2nd generation voters, you know, Latinos might come into the country, and because of immigration is this hot topic, they end up being aligned to the Democrats. But actually, for cultural reasons, they're probably better aligned to the Republicans, because usually Latinos come in and they are strong Catholics, or they're religious, very strongly religious, and they will align more likely to the Republicans naturally. We get this with Islam as well. Some people think Islamic voters, that I had this argument with someone on the live stream recently, where they were talking about Islamic fundamentalist terrorism is a left-wing thing. And you're like, are you serious? Like, fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism, is the antithesis to social, moral, left-wing liberalism. It is religious fundamentalism that is no different to Christian fundamentalism, in the fact that you've got theocratic ideals and you've got a denigration of sexual pluralism and so on and so forth. So, you know, Islamic fundamentalism and Islamic terrorism can actually, and some people do, put that in with right-wing terrorism in the same way that you would put in Christian fundamentalism. The problem is that people who are Christian fundamentalists think that Islamic fundamentalists they're anathema to them because they're like the enemy. But actually, they're the most similar sorts of people. It's like, we've got a holy text, and we are going to use that holy text to define our morality and to define our politics, because politics is a subset of morality. So actually, they're really similar. So Islamic people, you get this in the UK, like quite a lot of Islamic families end up being quite conservative and voting conservative and drifting. It's only when they initially come to the country that there's a pushback to them being immigrants that often comes from the right, that they shift towards voting with the left. But they're not morally, socially aligned to the left. They're actually naturally more inclined to the right. And there's that interesting tension there. And anyway, in the November elections, you started seeing this drifting back of a lot of, or drifting, not back, drifting towards republicanism, a lot of the Latino vote. People were sucked in by Trump, people sucked in by social media stuff, and so on and so forth. What you might now see with ICE having going to town on immigrant populations is a solidifying of the Latino vote for the Democrats going forward. And this could be an early sign of this. So this is in Arizona. You're going to have a lot of Latinos here. You're going to, in fact, she looks like she's Latino from her name, I presume. So Kamala Harris won this district by 22%. And what did I say? It was 43%. So it's basically doubled. The swing to the Democrats after Charlie Kirk was killed in a special election where this can get the Epstein files published, that support for the Democrats doubled. That's absolutely incredible. And in fact, when you start looking at some of these counties across Arizona's 7th congressional district, you've got a swing. So this Pima County went from D plus 28 to D plus 46. Cochise went from D plus 19 to D plus 47. Maricopa went from D16 to D36. I mean, that's a huge swing. That's over doubled in Maricopa County. And that's a big old county, as far as I remember. That's one of your defining counties in Arizona when you're looking at sort of presidential elections. Your Yuma, D plus 1 to D22. That's a factor of 22. That's plus 21, but it's a factor of 22, if you like. I don't know if that's fair, but Pinal, a Republican plus 32 to Republican plus 20. So losing 12 there. So this is a significant shift. So I'm spending a bit of time on this because actually this is super important to understand what is going on with the electorate in the US, because we can get sucked in to looking at things on Twitter, right? And thinking, oh my goodness, the world is going, or America is going authoritarian, and there's this outpouring of pro-Republican sentiment and Christian nationalism, and support for Charlie Kirk, etc., etc. And then we look at actual data, and it's looking a little bit different on the ground. Now, this could be a lot to do with motivation to vote. Right, the Democrats are going to be way more motivated to vote than the default Republican voter who will stay at home because they're not really bothered about this, blah, blah, blah. So there is that to take into account. But you've got other things happening. So this is, as someone says, bro, what the F is happening? How are we flipping a county supervisor seat in rural Iowa? So this is just a random election that's just happened. But it's a rural Iowa seat, right, for a county supervisor. Okay, kind of irrelevant. But you've got a Democratic flip in a county supervisor board seat where just by a little bit, the Democrats have got somebody voted in there. That is another potential indicator that actually Trump's agenda is not as popular as he may think it is. And there are worries for the midterm election. Why this then becomes important is, are you going to see a Viktor Orban style march towards autocracy where Trump is recognizing that the midterm elections are going to be an absolute nightmare? And so he has to do something to rig the election in his favor. And I keep talking about in my American political videos, right? I keep talking about the march towards autocracy, but also how much should we be justified in our worry that he will rig the elections, either soft or hard rigging. By soft rigging, I mean controlling the information spaces, taking mainstream media to court, getting TikTok is now, loads of Republicans are in charge of TikTok, it looks, and stuff like that. That's just soft rigging, where you're rigging the information spaces, but then you get the hard rigging of actually, putting things in place to stop people voting and getting rid of voting machines and mail-in voting, because that actually benefits Democrats or people who are poorer. People who are poorer are generally going to vote. Some of these communities of color that don't have photo ID as much. Older people, they can't get to the election, so they do mail-in balloting. But then if you're outlawing that, then who does that benefit, etc., etc. Okay, Spencer Hakimian here says, we now have multiple prominent Republicans openly calling for Trump to illegally run again in 2028. So added on to the midterm elections, you've now had Lindsey Graham yesterday saying he hopes Trump will run again in 2028. He can't constitutionally run again in 2028. So if he's hoping that will happen, and Trump's got all his caps that he keeps showing people and merchandise that says Trump 2028, this is now becoming a serious, more and more serious problem where actual elected Republicans are proposing the idea in all seriousness that the man runs again in 2028. So we are now having multiple prominent Republicans calling for this. Understand where we are and what is happening to your country, says Spencer Hakimian. And I watched all three parts of it.
We are struggling to communicate. We're struggling.
On Stephen Colbert today on YouTube. And it was a fascinating interview. And I'm interested in Gavin Newsom because you've got a bit of a dilemma for the Democrats, because you want someone to fight. Gavin Newsom is fighting. He's doing all the fighting. He's going up and up in terms of popularity. He's doing a really good job of ridiculing Trump online. But he's also saying, the reason I'm doing this is because the Democrats want someone to fight and no one's fighting and I'm here fighting. But then you've got the dilemma for Democrats is that he's another Californian, and Kamala Harris was a Californian, and will he have an appeal right across the country? Lots of people in the middle and some Republicans who might swing vote might say, no, I don't want to vote for another Californian, California liberals, blah, blah, blah. But he is one of those. But you watch him in this interview, and he genuinely is getting angry about all the things I've been getting angry with for the last few months. And here's just 37 seconds of him doing that, where he's genuinely.
We are struggling to communicate. We're struggling to win back now the majority in the House of Representatives. And that's a big part of what I'm doing, not just today in terms of the work out here, raising money, but also raising awareness around how Donald Trump is trying to rig the midterm elections and how I fear that we will not have an election in 2028. I really mean that. And the core of my soul, unless we wake up to the code red, what's happening in this country, and we wake up soberly to how serious this moment is.
Now, you can feel it. It's genuinely like, this is a serious moment. He's going to rig the elections. We won't have an election in 2028. And he says, I feel that in my soul. Right, and he is probably he's a front runner at the moment for leading the Democrats. There is serious worry that the American political system is being taken apart brick by brick, and the Trump administration is going to rig not only the midterms, but the 2028 presidential election. And he is genuinely perturbed about that, and you could sense that there was that element of kind of anger and whatnot. So I found that pretty interesting. Now, just going back to Charlie Kirk, and there's some things I'm really worried about in terms of rolling back the Constitution. So the Constitution was written to try and separate powers and to separate the church and state. So separating powers, you have the executive, the White House, the Congress, and the judiciary. Now, the unified executive theory of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 looks to focus all the power back into the White House, which looks like dictatorship. And then you've got this move to start getting rid of the separation of church and state and to try and get some kind of Christian nationalism going, and then to try and have schools become overtly politicized. Oklahoma, we've already had teachers have to have a loyalty test now. They're trying to pass a bill there, a loyalty test to Trump, like teachers. And then the Oklahoma superintendent did something else recently, which was absolutely batshit crazy. And then there's this one as well. So Oklahoma, that was it. They want in all, I told you this, in all Oklahoma state universities, they want a statue of Charlie Kirk and his wife Either Charlie Kirk, and they've literally written this out, they stipulated either it has to be a monument that has Charlie Kirk sitting on an opposite table, or Charlie Kirk with his wife holding a kid, blah, blah, blah. So that's what, and I presume it's probably the same guy here. Oklahoma State Superintendent just announced that every single high school in the state will now be required to have a Turning Point USA chapter. So a high school has to have a political Charlie Kirk, Republican aligned political chapter in the school. Ask yourself, how would the right react if Democratic superintendent forced every school to host a Black Lives Matter club, a Sunrise Movement chapter, or an Antifa club, or a Planned Parenthood student group? They would call it indoctrination, and they'd be right. This is deeply concerning. Public schools should not be turned into mandatory recruitment hubs for a political organization. And yet that is exactly what has happened. It's absolutely astounding, right? And then there's this. The White House, the official White House statement from their handle, their Twitter handle, on September 22nd said, without borders, law and order, and religion, you don't have a country. So you're starting to get this creep in of a lack of separation between church and state, and a lack of separation of politics and education here, where schools are and universities are being used as in a game of political football. And that is deeply worrying. And the White House official statement can talk about wrapping religion up with law and order and borders and the country. This is taking the separation of church and state and burning it. Not overtly, this is quite subtle here, but James Surowiecki says just outrageously, insanely unconstitutional for an official government account to say this about religion. Jefferson and Madison are rolling over in their graves. Absolutely would agree with that. Now, I just want to a slightly lighter note here. I want to illustrate this. So you had that huge crowd of essentially Christian nationalist Republicans, broadly speaking, not entirely, but it's largely going to be that, who are supporting Charlie Kirk because of his traditional values. So he was essentially not a big fan of the LGBT community. He was not a big fan of anything that didn't look like your nuclear family, man and a woman pumping out loads of children, blah, 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 blah. But it turns out, and this is not for the first time, because this happened at the Republican National Convention as well, but down detector stats for Grindr. So if you don't know what Grindr is, Tinder is your dating app, right? Grindr is your dating app for gay people. And so many people were using Grindr in Arizona that it fell apart. And this is the down detection. So this is how much this particular app or website is failing to work because it's being overloaded. So MAGA flew in for Charlie Kirk thing and broke Grindr. That you've got 200,000 people saying, yeah, we don't like gay people, like out loud, but in secret. And it's so honestly, so often I used to write articles on like Christian pastors having rent boys and whatnot, and oh look, here's another Christian pastor who's been homophobic on the outside, preaching to his congregation that homosexuality is a sin and blah blah blah, and excoriating anyone who sits outside that kind of nuclear idea of nuclear family, and then on the side they're having male rent boys and blah blah blah. Well, it turns out that this is very much the case with at least quite a lot of those people at the Charlie Kirk Memorial. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there. Right. Very quickly, I mentioned that Tom Homan, the guy in charge of ICE, is apparently on video in an undercover FBI operation taking $50,000 in cash to influence contracts for when he got into government. So this happened in summer 2024, before the election took place. He said, you give me 50,000 in cash and I will give you contracts when I'm in power in charge of ICE. This was known about and they appointed him anyway. And then they disbanded the investigation into him from the Department of Justice. The Public Integrity Unit was quashed. It quashed the Homan investigation. And then you have people like Caroline Levitt kind of denying all this, and who is it? Megyn Kelly saying, really, this isn't important, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's like, really? You would have said this when a Democrat was found taking $50,000? Anyway, this should be the end of Tom Homan, right? As one of the main people in the Trump cabinet. Really, he's the guy behind ICE and the deportations. And yet, nothing. Apart from, there is a Senate Judiciary Committee, or at least the Democrats have launched a review into Tom Homan investigation. So there could be something that ends up coming out from this, but I don't know, because it's probably just going to come from the Democrats. Under your management, the DOJ has touted its commitment to transparency and released records from other closed investigations. This case should be no different. So if you've done it for other investigations, you need to help us look into the investigation of Tom Homan. We'll be interested to see what happens about that, because that is corruption. So, but again, we go back to, I wonder, what was that other stat we talked about? What was that other stat? Guys, can you remind me? What happened? Oh, yeah. Under the Trump administration, the Justice Department has reduced its number of anti-corruption lawyers from 36 to 2. You've got no anti-corruption lawyers, and you've got a cabinet member or near enough doing corruption, and the investigation getting closed down. We can't do that investigation. We've got no lawyers left to do it. Okay, fair enough. Absolutely outrageous. But, you know, corruption runs through the White House, because it turns out that the Trump administration has dropped the law case into Nikola CEO Trevor Milton. So Nikola being the company. His case has been dropped. I wonder why it's been dropped. Is it because it doesn't stand up in court? Is it because there's not enough evidence? Oh, no, he donated $1.8 million to the Trump campaign and hired Pam Body's brother as the attorney. Okay, that's what's happened. Right, okay, so that looks like quid pro quo there. That looks like more corruption. It's all right. I'm going to get the lawyers onto you, Trump. I'm going to get the lawyers onto you, Trump. You know it's going to happen. I'm going to get. Oh, no, you got rid of the lawyers. Oh, no, there are no lawyers looking. Oh, okay. Oh, why I oughta. And finally, going to talk to you about more lies. In a staggering lie, Caroline Levitt claims Trump has secured nearly $9 trillion in investment to the US. That's larger than the GDP of every nation on earth except the US and China. It's not just false, it's cartoonishly simple. We have a problem at the moment that the lies are so big and so often and so regular, they're so consistent and bonkers that we've normalized, again, like the speech at the UN, we've normalized bonkers behavior. We've normalized Trump's presidential insanity. And we've also normalized lying. Overt lying has been normalized. Just like, you can't sit there and say you've got nearly $9 trillion of investment, especially when in Georgia, it turns out you've lost Hyundai because you've gone and arrested all of the South Korean workers. ICE has just walked in and got rid of 300 of them and sent them back to South Korea. And now it's so bad that Brian Kemp, the governor, is going to South Korea. He's going to South Korea. And I was watching Chris Norland today, talking about who's a South Korean American. He's saying they're not too keen about him doing this, and you know it's not going down very well. There are some rumors that Hyundai could pull out of the US. So, you know, talking about on the one hand how many trillions of dollars of investment, and on the other hand scaring away investment, and like not sure how that tracks. When asked, Caroline Levitt, how does Trump saying I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them square with bringing down the temperature of political violence? So that's what he said at the memorial. That was a loving eulogy to Charlie Kirk. He said, I hate my opponents and I don't want the best for them. So a lot of hatred there. This is Caroline Levitt.
So we heard from Erica Kirk. She said she forgives the man who shot and killed her husband. And then right after that, we heard from the president who said, I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them. How does that square with bringing down the temperature of political violence in this country? And then if I could, I had a follow-up on Venezuela too.
Look, the president is authentically himself. I think that's why millions of Americans across the country love him and support him, including Erica Kirk, who you saw so beautifully was on stage with the president in an unthinkable moment, in the midst of an unthinkable tragedy, and was leaning on the president for support during that time. And he was there to give it to her, as well as the vice president and many other top-ranking cabinet officials. Kayla.
I would ask precisely one question in the White House press corps, because after every question, any question that gets asked to Caroline Levitt, she doesn't answer the question. And if I asked that question and she gave me that answer, I'd say, I'm sorry, Caroline Levitt, but you did not answer the actual question I asked you. I said, how does that square with bringing down the temperature of political violence? And you told me about his character and that he's just being authentic. So he's just being authentic in his hate for other people. So he authentically hates other people. Brilliant. Thanks for that. You've just gone back to what I was talking about earlier about, is Donald Trump the sort of person I want my children to aspire to be? No, it's not. Right? Okay. So he's authentically hateful. But then Erica likes him and he's done blah, 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 blah. I asked you, how is this bringing down the temperature of political violence? And you've not answered the question. So Caroline Levitt, please answer the freaking question. At which point I get thrown out of the White House. But at least I'd have my 5 minutes of fame. Right. Okay. Final thing I'm going to tell you, then I've got to go and drink a cup of tea and see my missus, who's been back and wondering what the hell I'm doing, still talking to the internet. Here is a massive, massive screed from Donald Trump on Truth Social. I'm not going to read it to you. What I am going to do is give you the TLDR from Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, because this is going to be very important and it's going to happen in the next soon. This is delusional, he says, but you don't have to read the whole thing. It boils down to this. Trump's shutting down the government because he thinks he's a king. Essentially, what you're going to see is there's going to be a government shutdown. And because Trump has control of the trifecta, the Congress of the Senate and the House of Representatives and the president, he's the president. Republicans control everything, but the government will shut down. And they will try and blame the Democrats, but they've only got themselves to blame. The government will shut down due to funding and budgets and not agreeing and blah, blah, blah. And there will be a lot of people who aren't going to get paid, and it's going to be pretty horrible times going on in the US. It will happen. I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. So just get ready for that, and get ready for a lot of invective and rhetoric that seeks to blame everyone else but himself. Okay, there you go. That's my geopolitical analysis of everything that's going on in the world. I know it's not just about Ukraine. I know we talked a lot about the US. We talked about Argentina. We talked about Hungary and Moldova. Those are much more aligned to talking about Ukraine. But I think we need to understand what's going on in the world. And it's interesting. I'm interested in it. And if you're here for it, I'm here for it. So I hope that was okay for you. I just want to say thank you very much again to Kevin Forst. I really appreciate that. Please, can you go to atpgeo.com/donate, and you can help out with our Car for Ukraine fundraising campaign. And I would really, really appreciate that. Thank you to the live chat. I'm sorry I have not interacted with it. I was on my own today. And I'm sure you guys have had a wonderful conversation with each other. And I appreciate you guys making this community a wonderful community to be a part of. So thank you. Thank you to the mods who have also done that. Yeah. So if I did say that in the White House, it would be 5 minutes of righteous ranting. And hopefully it would get widely televised. I would, if I was a journalist, I think I would just go out in a blaze of glory with Trump. I'd have to take him down, really incisively take him down in a way that would get absolutely viral, but I would be banned from the White House forever and a day. But yeah. So anyway, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. You're a good bunch of people. And I do have a whole military aid video that I'm not going to have the energy to record today because it's got loads of stuff in. So I'll leave that for tomorrow, but it keeps getting bigger and bigger because I keep leaving it. But I do have a 5-point, an FP5 or a Flamingo missile information video that I'm going to release later today. So you can watch that instead and get all excited about me talking about military equipment tomorrow, as I know you will. I know you just won't be able to wait. It'll just be too exciting for you. You won't be able to contain yourselves. In the meantime, big love to you all, and take care of yourselves and be very aware of growing authoritarianism in whatever country you are in. I've talked a lot about the US, but I'm worried about the UK. I'm worried about Germany. I'm worried about Europe as a whole. I'm very worried about the EU. I'm worried about Georgia. I'm worried about everywhere, really. I think democracy is on a back foot at the moment, and we need to fight damned hard to keep it alive and kicking. So, up democracy. I'm on your side. But it's difficult, isn't it? Anyway, I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips. Big love.